There we go. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this, I guess technically it's a special meeting of the PUD, although they all seem special to me, but we're here at 5, extra special. Wednesday, October 20th at 5 p.m., I will officially call us to order. Can we get a roll call, please, Regina?
Absolutely. Oh, these are my mics. Director Harris?
Here.
Director Bender?
Here.
Director Aguera?
Here.
Vice President Laliotis?
Here.
President Finn?
Here. Very good. And we have the Pledge of Allegiance is next on. As you are willing and able, please stand to join us. And Director Harris, would you like to lead us in the pledge today?
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
Under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Let's see. Brian, do we have any changes to the agenda this evening?
President Finn, we do have one change. Staff would like to remove or withdraw workshop item number 9. Unfortunately, staff presenting this evening had a personal emergency, and so we'd like to reschedule this for a later date, likely the November 3rd board meeting.
Okay, that is something for me to continue to look forward to, and I do. And I forgot to give the thumbs up. Nothing that important has happened. Let's see, public comment. This is time that is set aside for the public to come and address the board on any matter that is not on the agenda. Testimony related to an agendized item should be addressed at the time that that item is considered. So do we have any public comment? I don't see any member of the public here to comment. Do we have any written comments this evening?
No written comments.
Okay, very good. In which case, we shall move on to director updates. This is time for directors to comment on any item within the purview of the district, but that is not on the agenda. Do we have any director's comments this evening? Director Harris, please.
I do. Thank you, President Finn. I wanted to thank, this week I visited CAT, the Contractors Association of Truckee, Tahoe, their Government Affairs Division. I wanted to thank them for having me and listening, and I, more than anything, I like to listen to them. But I feel that they are feeling the pain of the regulations and the challenges with regulations in the building industries. So it was an interesting conversation, but we, talked about elements of the strategic plan and just listening in on what they had to say about it. So thank you, Kat, and that's all I had to say about it.
Thank you, Director Harris. Do we have any other director comments this evening or updates? No.
Nothing, thank you.
Very good, thank you. I just have a quickie that I attended our CZIT meeting, which is our Carbon Zero new alliance that we're collaborating with. It was essentially a rundown of the legislative history of greenhouse gas emissions regulation here in the state of California, and also sort of segued into funding opportunities and things that are available now and look to continue to be available into the future. It's different, everybody's got their different timelines for releasing of funds. And I have to say it was it was a lot of information. But I'm feeling very optimistic right now, which is, I'm usually pretty optimistic, but I feel like we're just on the crest of a real wave of progress in not only collaboration, but in renewables and in technology, and in, it's just a moment that we are poised to make the most of. This district has a long history of being ahead of the curve, and we are well positioned to continue that example and to really help this community become more safe, more resilient, more healthy, and ready to adjust to what the future is going to be like. So it's exciting. It's exciting. There's a lot of optimistic news out there on the technology front and the economic front, even though it doesn't necessarily always feel that way. But I just wanted to share that with you and hope that you all are also feeling that excitement of working on something, 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 Which brings us to the direct, note that I'm the director and I updated Brian, general manager update.
Thank you, President Finn. I do have a few updates. First, I'd like to echo your sentiments on the Carbon Zero Truckee Tahoe Alliance. That's great collaborative approach to community benefit there. Some exciting projects in the pipe works, I know for sure. That group really puts their heads together and comes up with some great programs. Similarly, this morning we had one of our monthly meetings for the Truckee Tahoe Workforce Housing Agency. That's previously the group formed by the airport district, school district, the hospital district, and the PUD. We this morning welcomed aboard the town of Truckee, Placer County, and Nevada County. So 3 more public agency, public partners there that can collaborate and make some real progress here, make some headway in the challenges we have here locally with workforce housing. In the future, look for some presentations from staff on items like long-term rental assistance, down payment assistance, and master leasing programs that will really help all of these public agencies find legitimate, viable housing in different formats. So we're exploring all opportunities and ideas there, and it's pretty exciting. I kind of give week or monthly updates on the utility arrearages, the past due accounts. I mentioned at the last board meeting, those kind of flatlined. Similar results right now to report out, but I most importantly wanted to say that the application process for some of that relief is still a work in progress. The district's going to be focused on that. Not unexpectedly, there is a lot of administrative heavy lifting to accomplish some of that relief, so we're working on that diligently. On the waterfront, I think it was late yesterday afternoon, the governor announced a proclamation expanding the emergency drought situation to all counties in California. There isn't immediate action for the district, but basically this proclamation releases some funding opportunities for those affected by the drought, monetarily or just from a resource standpoint. It also provides opportunities or direction for public water utilities to implement or execute their water shortage contingency plans. I know some of the local agencies here in the North Tahoe, Truckee Basin have already implemented some of their lower level contingency planning. The district at this point hasn't executed or implemented our contingency plan, mostly because we've been monitoring groundwater levels and production levels, and we believe that based on the data we have, we're in a good situation, but we'll continue to monitor that. And much like the 2014 emergency drought regulations that came in play, this is kind of the precursor to maybe further action. The governor's proclamation does direct each public agency to begin the prohibitions against wasteful use. Those are, if you remember, established back in 2015, using water to wash down driveways, decorative landscaping that includes fountains or water use. Those types of potable water uses are prohibited if the local utility deems the local circumstances warrant that prohibition. So we'll continue to evaluate that and probably see us launch or reinvigorate some of our conservation and water-wise usage education and advertisement there. Kind of on that front, in terms of water usage reporting, we're looking at 2021 is definitely higher water use than in historical years. It's down year to date from 2020, which is good news. We had some pretty high usage months going into the summer, but now that we've gone into the fall, what we're seeing is compared to last year, which was a very dry, hot fall, we're already starting to see the cooler temperatures and the moisture there, so water usage is dropping, and we're still, under our baseline 2013 conservation data or usage, but we definitely need to continue to watch that. Likewise, power is up about 5 to 6%, similarly to the water side, so it's something for us to continue to track. We saw some initial increases during what was presumed to be COVID migration into the basin, but now we're starting to see the climatic effect in terms of our local weather. And then finally, I wanted to touch just briefly on the recent power outages, PSOM, the unplanned outages and planned outages. Staff has been, receiving some, not in high numbers, but we have been receiving some feedback from the community on, our current practices, what our plans are in the future. And that feedback has ranged from our community outreach, kind of boots on the ground with those pop-up information booths we set up with the town of Truckee. Some very positive feedback of, you guys are doing a great job. Thank you for not, creating a scenario where we're at a higher, elevated fire risk because of our, our infrastructure maintenance has been at such a high level. And then we also get feedback that there's a desire for more immediate, real-time information. And so I really wanted to talk about kind of managing expectations. The district will continue to leverage our current customer service and, technology infrastructure to put information out there in the most timely manner that we can. But I would ask that our customer base, our ratepayers, kind of be reminded that we're kind of all in this together in terms of what's recently developed in terms of PSOM and the recent wildfire mitigation because of, reverse or inverse condemnation. We've seen the horrific tragedies there with PG&E fires in our northern area of the state. And, over the last decade or so, this board has really provided the means and policy for this district to harden up our infrastructure to avoid some of those major catastrophic failures. And so I want to, make sure that we're reminded on where our efforts have been. And now we kind of transition, we continue to do that investment in infrastructure, but really looking at what's the best way to provide this next level of customer need. And so we are, as a staff, going to explore things like Nixle, which is a text-based notification program as opposed to an internet-based. Over the last couple of outages, we have noticed that things like, or resources like our outage map aren't easily delivered over the internet because there's a clog in bandwidth. For example, we've seen Suddenlink put out text that there's an outage and their networks are down. That means that perhaps some of our customers don't have access through those traditional means of communication. So things like signing up for email push notifications may not work as quickly as desired. And so we'll explore. I know that the Fire Protection District and local town police department have Nixle accounts. We've had meetings with them and for reasons that, I'm not in disagreement with, that they would prefer to keep their notification platforms prioritized for their emergency notifications. So I think there's an opportunity for the district to explore that and perhaps some of our own text push notifications that we have within our own system. What we want to kind of avoid is the expectation that there is 24-hour, 7-day-a-week staffing or, staff available to modify or customize these notifications. They're going to be in large part broad-reaching notifications of large regional or substation level outages. You're not going to see, the staff simply doesn't have the bandwidth or the capability to have real-time, circuit level or property account level notifications. And so that's where I kind of leaning out to manage expectations. We're seeing, in order to get to that level, it's going to take a really extensive investment in our customer service platforms. We're seeing, the investor-owned agencies, PG&E has proposed to the Public Utility Commission anywhere from 30 to 60% rate increases to become effective in 2022 and 2024. Those were largely driven by wildfire mitigation needs, the PSPS notification upgrades, metering upgrades, customer platform upgrades. And so that should be an indicator of, the level of investment the larger investor-owned utilities will need to accomplish in order to get that real-time immediate notification. We are doing benchmarking with some of our other neighboring publicly owned utilities up here in Northern California area and really trying to learn how they're approaching some similar challenges. And we'll continue to bring feedback to the board. But I'm really reaching out to our customers, the board, that we kind of manage expectations. I want to celebrate the successes when we have them and then learn the lessons when they're necessary. For example, the last outage was an NV Energy transmission outage that was in response to a pole fire that a tree crew noticed. And so I want to commend NV Energy for the rapid response and not creating a wildfire on the eastern slope of the Sierras. PUD staff, after hours, drafted and sent out an update, a message notification within the hour, and was accurate within, I think, 20 or 30 minutes on the projected restoration. So those are successes, despite some of the challenges we have in bandwidth during regional power outages. So look for updates from staff in the coming months. We will pursue some form of text-based notification. It does require opt-in from our customers, and so that's going to be an important thing to remember. It won't be a scenario where we have all 14,000 customers text, in the text profile or in the text database. The good news is text notifications such as Nixle are subscriptive, so to speak, and so folks who aren't account holders or frequent visitors or in the kind of periphery, they come into Truckee for dinner or the weekends, or they make reservations, they'll have access to that information if necessary or if desired. That's the advantage to that text-based notification system, but we do have to kind of build that database based on communication compliance and regulatory compliance. So that was long-winded. I just wanted the community out there to understand that we are hearing the feedback. We are working on this to improve that, that desire for immediate notification, but also managing expectations. We are going to continue to focus on our core mission of not starting the fires, knock on wood. And our crew has done an amazing job over the last couple of decades. The board's done an amazing job, and staff as well. And so we're going to continue to deliver that mission and see where we can improve some of the notifications. Thank you.
I just add to that, Brian, I really thank you for bringing that topic up. And I think it is important to manage expectations. And I just want to point out that, how good a job you guys did communicating a situation that wasn't even our situation. And reminding the public that there's a time gap between someone else's infrastructure going down and us getting the information that's accurate and timely enough to be able to then communicate to our customers what the situation is and perhaps when we can restore power. So, managing expectations, managing, the reality of a situation, I think is very important for all of us as a board to remember when we're talking to our customers and when we're seeing these posts about people saying, well, I'm not getting any information. And perhaps the district doesn't quite have all the information yet either. But instead of just communicating something that may not be accurate, let's get good, solid, accurate communications out to our customers. And that may take an hour, it may take 2 hours. And that's, that's just how it has to be. So we as a board need to keep that in mind as we hear feedback from our community about timeliness and information, is that, we're not always in control of that information. I appreciate that, and I appreciate, the communication you guys sent out. You guys got all the information you needed from the affected party itself, and then communicated that to our customers. So, and I appreciate that, and I think, we're doing the best we can. So, thank you for that.
Agreed. And I would say thorough was the adjective I would use to describe your presentation. And yeah, even in my own family, my husband called me like a minute after the power went out, and I'm like, dude, we have nothing to say. I have nothing to say to you right now. Chill. It's been a minute. We don't know what's going on yet. Let's figure it out. And my next question to him was, did you sign up for notifications? And he was like, no. Okay, well, just, there's still a component of, this is a real world thing that happens in real time, and need real human beings to, address, go out in the field, see what's going on. It's not magic and it's not movies, it's the real physical world. So, yes, I agree with all of those things that.
I mean, what happened to the point where you just poked your head out the window and saw if your neighbor's lights were off and say, oh, there's a power outage?
There's a power outage, yeah, exactly. I'm like, it's out everywhere, honey, it's out here, it's out where you are, we'll figure it out and we'll let people know, and we'll work to get it back on as fast as we can. That's really our priority.
I'm kind of coming for changing places with me tonight because my hearing's a lot better with a head table, and I think, both sides are equal. So thank you
Yeah,
again.
you can thank staff for making
Perfect.
those changes.
Who did?
You can thank staff for making those changes.
Thank you.
Good, we're getting better and better all the time, huh? It's a good thing. Which brings us to our first action item, number 8, consideration of rejection of all construction bids for the Mardis Hydropneumatic Pump Station Replacement Project. Do we have any public comment on this item? I don't see any here in person. Do we have any virtual comments?
No, Madam President.
Thank you. In which case, I think we are ready to listen to the presentation from Neil.
In the interim, President Finn, if I may, just wanted for a housekeeping item. As you can see, we've transitioned to a digital screen as opposed to the projector that we've had in the past. Obviously, there's some sizing adjustments here that's a little bit smaller in font. Ultimately, the long-term plan is that each of the board of directors will have access and a digital in front of them as well, so that you can navigate along with staff. For this evening, I believe you have a printed version with you. The long-term goal is to get paperless and have everyone have, easy access digitally. So presentations will be in the Dropbox when you come here at each of the board meetings in the evening. And if you wish to look at, the larger screen, you can as well. But that's just an update on where we're at with technology. We did do some testing based on the feedback we got from the public on some of the audio and visual for the streaming. Hopefully those are all resolved. Staff did work with the media group, local media group, to really test and refine the new technology we have. So fingers crossed, and we'll continue to make improvements on that.
Excellent, very good. And onwards to Neil, thank you.
Good evening, President Finn, members of the board. This is action item number 8, consideration of rejecting all construction bids for the Mardis Woods Hydropneumatic Pump Station Replacement Project. So the Mardis Woods tank site is located on Rocky Ridge Court, and it's the back end of the Mardis Woods subdivision. At that location, we have a ground level storage tank, an elevated storage tank, and a pump station. The pump station takes water from the ground level tank and pumps it to the elevated tank based on water level in the elevated tank. These facilities were built in 1982. And the elevated tank serves our Mardis Woods pressure zone, which currently has 45 single-family homes in it, and there are 3 vacant lots that we do expect to be built out at some point in the future. The district performed a structural elevation of the elevated tank that determined that significant repairs and upgrades to comply with current codes would be required. We did a rather rudimentary economic evaluation, that determined that replacement of the elevated tank with a hydropneumatic pump station would be more cost-effective, and that following construction of that new pump station, the existing elevated tank and pump station would be demolished. In December of 2020, the board awarded a contract to Far West Engineering to design the project. Advertising for bids began in August of this year. The bid opening was held on September 21st. We received 2 bids. They're outlined here in the table. You can see they're just over $2.1 million. The 2 bids were quite close together, So we do believe that that is reflecting the current construction climate, but quite expensive. And as you can see here, the bid for BRCO Constructors was more than double the amount we had originally budgeted for the construction phase of the project. So we we reviewed the bids with Far West Engineering to identify the likely factors for the cost increase. And what we're seeing was that there's been significant price increases and volatility for materials and equipment. And there is also a limited availability of specialized equipment such as electrical switchgear and generators. I think some of that has been discussed with the board in recent board items. And the contractors are also giving us feedback that they're experiencing labor shortages, which is also impacting their ability to perform work. Far West did note that other public agencies that they are doing work for have experienced similar cost increases, 75% to 100% over their original estimates. They're seeing a reduced number of bidders, and some projects are not receiving any bids at all. So the recommendation before you this evening is that the board reject the bids that we've received. They're, as we noted, significantly above the funds that we've budgeted for this project, and that staff will go ahead and review options available for the Mardis Woods site. We would like to proceed with an updated cost estimate for rehabilitation of the existing facilities. Perhaps that's more viable at this point in time. And then we would also look at rebidding the current design at a future date, and potentially in discussion with Far West, we might be able to identify some other options for this site. And that we would bring back some final determination and recommendations to the board at a later date after we've had a chance to review the situation. In terms of fiscal impact, there is no direct fiscal impact with rejecting the bids this evening. The Mardis Woods Pump Station Replacement Project was included in the FY 2021 capital budget, and we would recommend that considering the project would be postponed to a later budget cycle, that the monies dedicated for this project would be held, in the Water Capital Reserve Fund. So again, the recommendation before you this evening is to reject all bids received for construction of the Mardis Woods Hydropneumatic Pump Station project, and direct staff to evaluate potential options for the pump station and storage tank facility.
Do you want to discuss that, or can I move it?
I don't have anything personally to discuss. Does any other director want to pipe up?
I just hope that this doesn't happen to all of our capital projects. And that may be a prioritizing which ones really, need to happen sooner rather than later.
So in addition to the feedback we've gotten from Far West, I did have a conversation with a couple of the local material suppliers, Western Nevada Supply and Ferguson, and the feedback that I'm getting from them is, at least on the material side, there is significant price increases that they're seeing from the manufacturers. They have no choice but to pass those through. The manufacturers are basically not holding prices more than a couple of weeks out. So it's like the price you get today, you need to place that order today and almost put a deposit down. They will not hold that price for 2 months. And we're still seeing shortages of particular items. You know, if we go and look for a 6-inch valve, we normally have 3 or 4 different configurations available to us. A couple of those may or may not be available when we need them. So we're definitely seeing definite impacts on the material side, even just things that we're trying to do in-house. And we do expect that will carry forward. We don't expect radical increases in prevailing wages, but contractors might be forced to pay above prevailing wages if there continues to be labor shortages. So there is potential impacts in the future.
Okay, interesting times. I am happy to entertain a motion, if anybody.
I'll move staff's recommendation.
Second, did you second? You did. I seconded.
Okay, I hear a motion and a second. Regina, could I get a roll call vote, please?
Absolutely. Director Aguirre,
Yes.
Director Bender,
Yes.
Director Harris,
Yes.
President Loliotis,
Yes.
President Finn.
Yes.
Thank you, Neil, for all the work you put in this project already.
Yeah. Pretty sober presentation, thank you. Which brings us on to our workshop, item number 10, our final budget workshop number 3. And we are going to be receiving some more information from Mike Salmon, and hopefully we'll provide some strategic direction to staff. Thank you.
Good evening, President Finn, members of the board. Back from 10/6, and welcome to fall season, Oktoberfest season, and budget season.
Michael, you're gonna follow this, table?
Yes, sir, Director Aguirre. We'll be moving quickly through the first section. Today's agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about financial metrics, do a brief introduction, financial metrics. We're going to get into overheads, as we mentioned last on the 6th workshop. Look at the current draft summaries of electric and water changes since the last workshop, and then talk a bit about rates and the financial master plan in detail. So this is the third workshop. We've had 2 previous ones on the August 18th and October 6th. And then we're scheduled for November 3rd for a public hearing and action item for review and approval of the budget 2022 and 2023. Mission and values, strategic plan. I'm not going to repeat this information. This is the same, and the board is well conversed in this. So diving into the first item, so at the previous workshop, I mentioned what I was trying to dive into was that the financial, the capital assets, the plant of the water system is larger than the electric system, right? And not only that, it's aging, and it's aged quicker than the electric over time. And so I just threw together big pictures, financial metrics. The staff report includes much more information on metrics, but I did pick out a few here to cover briefly in the presentation. The first one is net position. As an individual, it's net worth. As a regular company, it's net equity or equity, retained earnings, those type of metrics. For a public agency, a special district such as the district, it's called net position. And the thing I would point out on this page is that the net position of 10 years ago, the net position of water was larger than electric, and now that is inverse. And so the net financial wealth of the entity of water has declined at a greater than water has, than electric, excuse me. The next one, specifically on capital plant, I'm on page 11. You can see that the net capital assets, that's gross utility plant less accumulated depreciation plus construction work in progress, was almost double, water was double the size of electric in 2010, and now is only 22% greater. So electric has caught up or water has declined, depending on how you look at it. It's really more the latter, that water has depreciated over the last 10 years at a greater rate than your reinvestment. This page I'm not going to get too in the weeds on, but just so you know, this is straight out of Fitch Ratings. It's one of the big bond rating agencies' metrics, and this is in the details of how they evaluate utilities. Specifically, they have a whole, I want to say about 150 to 175 page white paper on financial measuring ratings for water, sewer, and solid waste. They combine those three utilities together. And so these are just financial ways of looking at a rough estimate of the age of your plant and the infrastructure of your utility. And so the age of our water system has gotten older by a much greater rate than electric over the last 10 years. The plant life cycle ratio is approaching a level that indicates an elevated need for reinvestment. So important to know, as you know, we have a pretty aggressive capital improvement plans, particularly on the water side. The next item that was scheduled to be talked about was overheads. It's a mystery for a lot of folks. They don't understand what overhead means, and they think they're being overcharged or they're being double charged. And it's simply a method of distributing cost throughout the organization fairly. And the methodologies that are drafted here in this current budget are consistent with previous years. I had no intention of changing that methodology for a number of reasons. But it's important that everyone understand what those overheads are and what they mean and what's in them. So that's what we're going to go over. There's 4 of them: labor overhead, transportation, administration, and construction. So labor overhead. Labor overhead distributes the cost of payroll-related cost. So for every dollar of compensation, direct compensation that's on your W-2, there's associated costs with that. There's pension costs, there's payroll taxes that the employer pays beyond what the employee pays. There's an employer match, right? FICA and Medicare. There's workers' comp insurance. And then here at the district and a lot of companies, there's also in this overhead the cost of unproductive labor, the cost of vacation or paid time off, which is sick and vacation and administrative leave. And so that cost, they're not working specifically on electric or water or anything like that, so it's pooled into the overhead and then applied accordingly. Let's see. The main components for labor overhead that are pension cost, $2.8 million, medical and dental insurance, $2.8, non-productive labor costs, that's paid time off, $1.5 million, payroll taxes, $750,000, and then workers' compensation. Let's see, the labor overhead rate did decrease for budget 22, and then slightly upticks in budget 2023. And there's a lot of moving parts and pieces to that, but payroll cost increases, rate of pay increases doesn't mean that health insurance goes up, as an example. And so the net effect of that is that their actual burden rate has declined slightly compared to budget 21. This is the detailed amounts in comparison to previous years, and then this is that calculation to get that percent. That's the highlighted column in the middle. Simple math from there. So that's what I had about labor overhead. I can move to the next one unless there's any questions. Hearing none. The second overhead is called transportation overhead, and this is a very simple overhead that distributes the cost of maintaining our fleet. We have a large fleet, 80, rough numbers, 80 rolling stock pieces of equipment, and that cost is distributed out based on the payroll hours related to activities that include the utilization of fleet. And so it goes across both operations as well as capital projects as applicable. Let's see. And that rate has increased a little bit, or a bit, because we added a vehicle mechanic position. Page 20, administrative overhead, distributes the purchasing and warehousing common costs across operations and work orders and capital projects. So similar to transportation overhead, as applicable, it's applied across the entity based on payroll dollars. Payroll hours, excuse me. Payroll dollars.
Mike? I have
Yes.
a question. Does that also include customer service?
It does not include customer service. Customer service cost is distributed between electric and water, but it's not an overhead-specific calculation. The fourth overhead is called construction overhead, and as the name implies, there's administrative burden for construction projects to manage those projects. So there's a small amount of administrative overhead for construction that is applied to construction projects as applicable if they require those hours of administrative time. It's a fun calculation as exhibited on the screen. But roughly $275,000 is allocated to various capital projects depending on the year and the amount of hours dedicated to that. All right, that's overhead, exciting topic. I think. So since the October 6th workshop number 2, I have updated kind of the summary results of budget for 2022 and 2023 for electric and water, slight changes, and I'm going to get into those changes. This is the current draft and what it looks like. There was quite a bit of movement on the capital side, capital expenditures side, and very little movement on the expense side, and that would be the best way to summarize it. There is a new row item on this page, and it's on water. It's called debt issuance cost. So that was not in the previous draft. I didn't have the numbers, but so I had to factor that. Obviously, depending on the timing and what type of debt we issue, what that cost would look like and whether it hit in 2022 or 2023, but needed to have something in there. Excuse me. And then so on page 25, I have a breakdown of the 26.9 million in the operating expenses. That's dead center at the top, bracketed 26,903 in operating expenses. The next page, page 25, breaks down that cost between, this is again for electric, so customer service, as Director Harris asked earlier, is part of administration services. So in that 1,412,000 figure in the middle column, that the majority of that cost is customer service.
Can I ask another question? And you may be going into this. The board expense increase of 169%, change in budget?
Yes, I covered most of that last workshop, but I can recover it. I think I get to it in another slide here soon, yes. And then this is the same item for water, summary of activities and funds, fund flow and net. So in water, the net result was a positive $4,000, and now it's a positive $856,000, and that's due to timing of capital projects. And so there's a ability to bank up, basically increase reserves in 2022, and then it rolls out in 2023. There's a large spend in 2023. And then a sub-schedule of operating expenses for water is the next page, 27. So page 28, key summarization of changes from the previous draft. I increased, despite direction from the board to try and decrease expenses, I actually increased expenses. I apologize, but I can get into what that is. The main item of increasing expenses for electric was we shifted from budget 2023 to budget 22, vegetation hazard analysis for $105,000. Reviewing, finding other things to reduce, I did do that, but we also found to add 103. So we added 103 and then took away the 23 is the net. So we shifted from 23 to 2022 for vegetation hazard analysis, which is a new technology to help us with our wildfire management program. They felt it would be best to put that in 2022, not 2023. I agreed. I think Brian agreed, as I recall the conversation. So that's what we did. The net effect of capital expenditures was a savings of $356,000 in 2022. I added the debt issuance costs, which I mentioned, and then I changed the amount of capital reserves usage. So the net result for capital for electric was $141,000 favorable increase in operating reserve general fund. On the water side, changes were an increase in water for $188,000. The vast majority of that, I did find a few areas to shave, but I had to true up. I found problems with the allocated overhead components between water and electric. There was a few places where they had 100% electric and the water needed to get their share, so I had to fix that detail bug. And then I had to sync the water electric's interdepartmental revenue for water sales, right? So there's an intercompany transaction between electric and water, and that wasn't fully synced up for about $48,000. So I had to fix that. Otherwise, someone was going to come up short. So I had to balance that. Really did a full reset on capital expenditures. Part of that was the previous agenda item we just talked about that you just rejected. So I moved that out to a very future year. And then just in the interplay of particularly between budget 22 and 2023, there was a lot of movement from 2022 to 2023. Adjusted debt issuance, the amount of debt to be issued in 2022 based on that movement of capital projects, added debt issuance cost. One of those projects that moved had a facility fees usage, I believe the tank, and so I moved that, a portion of the tank cost. And so I moved that to that out year and changed the amount of capital reserves used. So those are the water changes. Specifically on that subject of me not addressing fully operating expenses and not shaving another 300 grand or whatever the number's in your head, I did dive into, I excluded payroll from this. This is a 3-year average of operating expenses for the electric utility, $4,581,000. And then rolling forward, how do we get to the draft number that we're at? Again, this is forget about payroll. This is just vendor expenses for a minute. Because there's a lot of moving parts to payroll. We talked about it last workshop as far as FTE and the changes there. We also have turnover that affects the beginning average. So I just to keep things simple, let's look at operating expenses for a minute. And the 3-year average plus 3%, because a 3-year average puts it at 2020, we're moving to 2022, so I added 3% for inflation to get at least 1 year forward is $4,581,000 starting point. And then we have these electric items that stick out. Strategic initiatives for vendors, 311. I skipped pole testing. So pole testing, there was a contract just approved for up to $200,000 for 3 years a few months ago by the board. We did not, that's the not to exceed amount. The budgeted amount's about 181, and you're spending closer to the 3-year average equates to like 40 grand. So that's a pretty big nut to factor in your adjustments. The veg management B2B is 500,000. The 3-year average change versus budget is a $323,000 change because we have been spending more than budget in the last 18 months. So I tried to isolate kind of why and where and how do expenses look reasonable or are they way out of whack? To me, this lays out that information in an informative way for the board to understand, all of us to understand. IT has been underspending for the last 3 years to budget, and I didn't want to just take that to the bank. I don't think it's appropriate. We're hiring a new IT director. We're behind the 8 ball in that world. We need to get back in on it. And so I didn't, we could shave this number, this 101,000 out of budget and be closer to the 3-year average for IT, but then you don't have the funds, the resources to do what really needs to be done in IT. So that's the roll-up of operating expenses for electric. I did a similar exercise for water. It was simpler. You have a 3-year average, strategic initiatives impact, the IT impact on water, and then actually a reduction in expenses of 1.3, so much tighter.
Mike, got another question. I'm sorry. Can you help me understand the strategic initiatives again?
Yes, absolutely, Director Harris. So first, previous workshop, the strategic initiatives didn't rise to bubble to my level of threshold for laying out, but there was an add in IT's budget for cyber services. And so that line item is on this page now. That's the $46,000. So that's one of them. And then the 311 for vendors for electric. I don't want to misspeak. Who hasn't memorized? Anybody? Voila. So the first item, and it addresses your question earlier on the board expense line item increase. The first item is $160,000 for professional services to continue momentum on the board initiatives, Big Four. So there's a $160,000 placeholder for professional services necessary in both years to keep the momentum moving forward on those projects. Whether we spend it or not, or all of it, or need more is yet to be determined, but that was the line item placed in there early on in the budget process. So that's $160,000. $30,000 is for grant application writing professional services. We hope to have a payback on that. So that's $30,000. $28,000 for laserfish and microimaging services. Let's see, $48,000 in safety-related programs for the electric. $30,000 for the aviation program. discussed last workshop, and then $15,000 for survey services.
Mike, if I might add, that initiative momentum would come in the form of the broadband committee. It would be likely that the district would need to initiate funding for a study, for example, to get the project moving. Then the collaborative effort would come in, the alternative funding would start to set in. So staff has put together a budget placeholder. Another example would be the Carbon Zero Alliance that the district is currently participating in. There is an initial startup investment, and those might, garner future funding from the district to get those projects running. So staff has put a placeholder over the next 2 years to account for those.
And I know during the strategic process, we talked about, I think it's called Monday.com or Monday, the project management software. Is that included in that too?
The Monday.com is a kind of a de minimis investment. It's a web-based, of maybe up to $1,000 a year, but it's not really going to move the ledger on the budget side of it. But we will be coming to the board with those presentations in the form of Monday.com for all the initiatives and the projects outlined in the strategic plan for each of the goals, each of the 5 goals. Sorry, Mike.
Thank you, Brian. So the next 5 or 6 slides, I think, pages are capital expenditure. I didn't know if you wanted me to dive into that or not. I put them in the presentation so you have it. But I've got kind of detailed projects for electric, and then the water, and then water summary, and then the detailed projects for water. And then I was going to dive into rates and the financial master plan. So it's 6 o'clock. So board's pleasure on capital projects.
Does anybody feel the need to get very granular with each of our capital projects?
President Finn, on that topic, I'd like to add the point that Director Harris brought up, is a great point about the uncertainty from the information we received in Neil Kaufman's presentation. Obviously, there's been aggressive capital funding through our rates at the end of last year for the water side, and staff will be presenting electric rates here in the coming weeks linked with the budget. But one of the things we'll have to consider directly to Director Harris's point is we may need to, over the next couple of years, start to prioritize our investments. We have a very aggressive capital improvement plan, kind of dovetails nicely in with Mike's presentation on depreciation and really catching up with that. But we will have to, over the next budget cycle, start to prioritize some of those long-term investments, because clearly, while the economics are supposedly transitory, we can't guarantee that. And so we may need to make some adjustments there.
Understood. Yep.
And reminding us all that as projects ebb and flow, which we all know they do, the asset continues to depreciate. And the money will be needed at some point. So it doesn't go away, it stays in a thing called reserves. And we're going to be talking about reserves soon.
Okay.
All right, moving on to the next subject is rates. For electric, 2017 was the first rate increase since 2009. 2020 was a 2.7% increase. 2021, it's called a 3% increase. It was closer to 2.7 on a blended average between primary and secondary for residential. And then commercial had the KW change, residential only had the customer service monthly fee portion of it change. Just for clarification, there's in in tandem, in parallel to the budget process, there is a rate study and process, cost of service analysis being performed, as well as a rate analysis. The current draft does recommend a rate increase for 2022 of 8.5% and 6% for 2023. I just stumbled on this one earlier today. The FRED, which is a little bit different than BLS, but it's a federal organization out of St. Louis that does industry-specific CPIs, and their San Francisco, Oakland, Hayward electricity CPI for the last 12 months, August 2021, was 9.3%. I don't make this up. So they have a water one too. It's water and solid waste. It's a very, very handy information. As part of electric rates, we are have a final draft basically of a green rate that will be part of the rate public hearing and rate recommendation that's forthcoming shortly, next few months here to the board. So that's exciting news. On that subject, there's quite a few several different methodologies to go about green rates. One of the more simple methods and the likely method we'll be recommending is somewhere between a 0.01 or 1 cent or to 3 cent range adder to the customer's KWH portion of their billing to elect the green rate.
We'll be getting a presentation on that whole thing in the
Absolutely.
upcoming couple weeks.
Yes. Not by me.
No.
I think you've had enough time in the hot seat.
So a couple other things to point out on rates. Liberty is filed with the CPUC for an average of 41% increase beginning in 2022 for winter, and summer increase of 42%. Residential seasonal is actually even greater than those percentages. This next slide is simply quantifying for primary, secondary, and then the blended of the two, what the average bill at 500 kWh would look like. So for primary, at 8.5% increase is a $7.20 increase over 2021, average bill of $91.92. Secondary is a little higher. And then the blended would be at 98.09, an increase of 768. Compounded annual growth rates. So those same rates for 2022, what do those look like over time, and what have we done to customers is kind of how they look at it over time, right? And so for primary, the compounded annual growth rate over the 5 years is a 4% rate increase. Over 10 years, 2.3, and 12 years, 1.9. And again, this is moving back from 2022's 8.5% increase recommendation. So if I was to summarize, in part, as you saw in the staff report, rates were held at the same rate for several years, numerous years in a row. Making up for lost time a little bit, but not entirely, because if you change the rate early, you get that compounding effect over time, versus if you wait till the end, you only get it that 1 year, and you might get the same compounded annual growth rate calculation, but it's not the same absolute dollars into the reserves and for helping pay for capital projects and things like that. So, but one way to look at it is what is my electric rate and how does it compare to previous periods? This is that information on one page over time. Looking a little bit further, if we adjust that 8.5 increase, what does a 1% change do? Well, in 2022, it would, if you decreased it to 7.5, it'd have a $284,000 cash impact. But it's much bigger than that because it ripples the next 9 exponentially, truly in perpetuity, right? But in the financial master plan, it ripples over the next 9 years as well, and on a magnitude, because you have customer growth, and then you have the rate increase for that following year that's applied to a smaller figure if you lower by 1%. So the net effect is pretty exponential, and we're going to get into that in a minute. Everybody follow that? You guys are aware of water rates that are already previously approved. So we have a financial master plan. This is the reserve balances as currently recommended with the rate increases as recommended and what that looks like over time. Near term, electric is close on to the reserve goals, so then it drops down a little bit over time and then levels out in the out years. This is a lot of information on one page. I apologize. It was in your staff report, and I should back up just a second. This is a detailed schedule of financial master plan. We have it for electric and water. I can pull this model up in Excel, and we can make adjustments and see what those ripple effects are by year, any year, 1 year, all years. We'll get there in a minute. I have a few scenarios to show you, but just be advised that I could real time. This is a workshop. I'm happy to pull up, have it available. I can, assuming it doesn't crash. We'll give it a go if you guys would like to do that. Yeah, board's pleasure. So.
Yeah, the board would like to do that.
In the dead center of the page, there's a highlighted couple of rows. This is the combination of operating reserve and rate reserve, which has, as you're aware, has a goal of 50%, 6 months as a reserve balance. And so what that as a percentage is shown here in the model as at recommended. You're right at your 50% each year. And just so you know, you have to prioritize in the model. I have to prioritize, otherwise I would be caught in, I think it's called a circular reference. I would still be working on it. So you have to rank and prioritize. Interestingly enough, in doing the benchmarking on reserves and what percent for the rate reserve percentage, I saw that same concept in the actual policy was the prioritization. Operating reserve is number one. At least that was for Los Altos, the one I saw that in. I think number one is actually debt reserves, those required by a debt issuance. They had that second. I don't understand that. So first would be debt reserve, and then operating reserve is very important. Then you fall into your capital reserves, rate reserves, deferred compensation reserves, as any other type reserves. So, of course, every business is different. So the compounded annual growth rate of all 10 years is 3.4%, and we end with 31.9 million in cash, which is not stockpiling cash. That is 50% of in 2031's reserve requirement. So that's the cost. The numbers get bigger over time, right? So this is the model as recommended, and then. In this next, I created a few scenarios and just kind of grabbed the main section here. This is if all we did from the recommendation was change 2022 down by 2%. And what that means is that every year except for the 2031, you have negative operating cash flow. It's at the very top. You see those bracketed figures. You're under your operating reserve requirement in all years, not any year. and your cash in year 2031 is $7.1 million less. So that's the 2%. If you decided to just change the 8.5 to 6.5, leave everything else the same. So it has a pretty dramatic effect in my perspective on it, and is not recommended. That's scenario 1, that's page 49. Scenario 2, I changed changed the 8.5 to 6.5, so down to, left 2023 at 6.5, and then changed 24 and 25, and I can't remember if I changed 26, but made those 5% instead of 3%. If you do that, you do end up with slightly greater revenues and greater reserves than in the recommended approach. But it means a bigger increase in 2024 and 2025. You're also under reserves in operating in the early years of 22 and 23. Not significantly, but you are under. Scenario 3 is lowering the 8.5 to 7.5 and increasing year 2, 2023 from 6.5 to 7, and then 5 and 5, and thereafter the same. And this has an exponential favorable impact on reserves really in all years except for 2022. And you end up with, because the near-term years sum total in the first 3 or 4 years is greater than in the recommended, you end up with much greater amount of cash in the end in year 2031 because you have a higher rate that you're charging for in those next 7 years. Even though the rate of increase in those out years is the same, it's on a larger figure. I like scenario 3 quite a bit. Certainly something to noodle on. So I just.
You like it more than scenario 1?
Oh, definitely more than 1. Or do you mean recommended?
Yeah,
The recommended.
Yeah.
There's truly not a black and white right answer there. There's pros and cons either way. I would ask the board and other staff really. I can, if there's a 4th scenario you want me to pull up, I'm happy to do that. We could give it a go live.
So, Mike, maybe give me some of your philosophy on holding 2% in the out years, like you have basically in most of the scenarios, versus something higher than that.
Well, what happens is you get the compounding effect of revenues being greater than expenses. And so without me going in and adding projects that I don't know about in the capital plan and the years 6 through 10, you were building up reserves. I could have left it at 3, put it at 3 instead of 2, but then your reserves get very robust. And that was great, but it's not in your policy to have them that big, so I left it at 2 instead of 3. So what happens is your operating reserve goes from 50% to 70, 75, 80%, which is great and would be a sign of a much healthier organization in the long term. But I'm happy to put that in and show you what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, that was more, obviously, I agree, where we want to land as far as not overextending the ratepayer power to get to a much higher level of reserve than we need. But I'm just, my philosophy has always been, let's make sure we don't fall too far behind. And if we can throw out some plans for rate increases that are palatable, more palatable on an annual basis, such as 3, and pull back some of the numbers in the first 4 years slightly, just to smooth it out a little bit more. So that's why I was that's why I'm not recommending, but just wanted to discuss the benefits of holding 2 versus 3 in the out years. If, I agree, we don't want to overextend, but can we balance it with a little more tempered rate increases on the front end?
Yeah,
And what's the danger there, from a cash flow perspective in the years where, we're still under our target, and then start to swing back up?
Well, part of it is you are dipping into reserves near term. And so you need to replenish that sooner than later. And that's kind of presented or shown here on this chart. So if to the extent capital projects delay, that wouldn't happen. But as the plan is laid out now, you're depleting reserves. There's a plan for a new building. Well, that's debt. There's the plan, for example, we've built up a capital reserve to address this building. The draft plan here is to spend that next year. It was in the budget that we're in now to spend it, and we didn't spend it. So that's sitting in reserves. So we're gonna drop and spend that. The plan is to do that project and get that spent. So you have to rebuild your capital reserves up. So I do, and the ripple effect of, again, the sooner you raise rates, you have that effect for all 10 years versus if you wait. There is some smoothing potential for sure, Director Laliotis. That's definitely an option. I can.
So on scenario 2, I think it was, do you have that available in a graph? I assume page 47 is based on scenario, or what's presented on page 48?
Correct.
Okay. I'm just curious, do you have a representation for the other scenarios, a graphical representation?
Just the numbers.
Just the numbers.
I can recreate it and show you the chart if you'd like. I can pull it up in Excel.
Yeah, I will also have that opportunity for the board to see those scenarios played out when we actually get into the electric rate presentation and workshop. This is for, early budget considerations.
And that's a good point. I apologize, Brian. We're not selecting rates tonight.
We can, definitely, as a preliminary discussion, but we'll have, at the board's request this evening, we can definitely, from the discussion this evening, prepare the workshop with more extensive tools.
Yeah, because we are thinking about it very hard right now. Yes.
Yeah.
One of the things for the board's consideration also as we finalize the budget process and go into the rate adoption is this information, these projections don't include some of the unknowns. And so the unfunded mandates, the district has had discussion from the community about potential backup generators, covered conductors, other regulatory compliance that aren't currently in front of the district. There's, from a regulatory perspective, we don't know what the future of PSPS in California is right now. It's currently investor-owned utilities only. And then likewise, the cost of energy itself on the open market in terms of a lot of discussion on regional transmission and what the net effect will be on the district for that. So as Mike said, it's going to be important that we, in the early years, establish a rate that doesn't put us in a precarious position in the out years in terms of reserves.
I have a question. So, talking about this building, it's gone through definitely a lot of different remodels. And I believe that the one that you're talking about is the external project, correct? Is that one Is that something that can be postponed for a few years?
It includes a couple of components. The external, exterior revamping is one component. Some of the solar energy infrastructure, the UV protection for climate control inside the district. There is an extensive internal electric circuitry remodel, panel remodeling to accommodate the new upgraded infrastructure. So there's definitely a need beyond, but yes, you're correct. That's primarily that external remodeling. And staff will be presenting a workshop in the coming months on the updated facility master's plan that does include what Mike's referencing in terms of the potential additional operations in, indoor storage for our equipment and material storage at the other yard, the corp yard. So that's also something that we need to consider in the long-term budget here.
So options from here, at least from my perspective, I can pull up the financial plan and put in 3% every year and see what that looks like if you'd like, as well as the chart. I can take board direction and create another scenario for consideration for recommendation on the 3rd, November 3rd.
November 3rd. It does seem to me that we like to see lots of scenarios. I think we're all trying very hard not to be
Either reckless or onerous, reckless with the care of our systems and processes, or onerous on our customers. So, and I know that we're all still feeling, we addressed this on the water side and we played a lot of catch up. So I would think of that as kind of a warning to us now that we don't want to play that game. We don't want to have to do that again. We don't want to have to raise rates 9%, 9%, 9% over, like that was a big chunk. And I think what we're trying to do right now with the electric is to, be a little more, not raise rates, but make sure we avoid putting ourselves in that same position on the electric side. You made this recommendation for a reason, for lots of reasons, most likely. But I do think the board, we like to see various scenarios, things that Director Laliotis talked about. 2%'s pretty low. Right now, obviously, it's not a patch on inflation. It's not keeping pace. I do think we would like to see the various suggestions that Director Laliotis has suggested, we suggested last time for our next, and I think we should all individually, board members, weigh the line we want to walk and be very sure about, rates higher, rates lower, rates sooner. They all have, your recommendation is powerful. We need to make sure, moving forward, that we have the resources that we are going to need to create the infrastructure that we need. So we clearly like to chat things out.
No, I appreciate you listening to us. There's definitely a lot of information here, and I appreciate the way you've laid it out and given us the different scenarios. A lot of food for thought here.
And I do find visuals helpful. We like charts with nice contrasting colors.
One question. So going back to just your capital expenditures, those I see go out to 2026. And so, how are you accounting for capital expenditures fiscal year 27 and beyond? You know, it kind of lines up with that 2%, and I think you've touched on this already, but I just wanted to clarify in my mind.
Right. So the capital improvement plan that the financial master plan utilizes is for 10 years. In the PowerPoint, for sake of real estate on the page, I only put the first 5 years.
Oh, okay.
Yes. But the financial master plan is referencing the detailed capital improvement plan that goes out for 10 years. Yeah, good question. But I didn't put it in a chart format, but I will next time.
Yeah, and it's really hard to go 10 years out, because who knows?
We just
who would
don't know.
predicted the
It is.
Fed was going to be 9%, right? This electric inflation. That's,
Yes.
wow.
Yeah, that's
So-
wow.
And Liberty has a 40% rate increase
Right,
on the
right.
books.
So,
Yep.
I guess just overall, I really like your scenario 3, you know, it flattens it out a little bit. We don't go, you know, positive cash flow in all years. So, I like that statement. Negative is scary. So, and then we'll have a rate full-on presentation.
In a couple of weeks,
In a
our next
couple of
meeting.
weeks, okay.
I believe November 3rd.
Right on the heels of-
That's
yes.
our hearing. So, yes, let's all be thinking about that. Let's be prepared.
And since we're looking at this, the capital projects, on page 33, there's an operations building for $6 million. Is that what is that the amount that we have for this operations building here?
Director Harris, that is for a new building at the Corp Yard that is proposed to be debt financed. 4.5 is, I believe, the figure for this building. 3 million remodel exterior and then 1.5 for surfaces, exterior drainage and surfaces. Did I get that right?
Got to keep the building standing.
And so it's for a brand-new building at the Corp Yard. So the Corp Yard right now, from what I remember, it has that's where we store all the wires, and we have that, that one building there. I must have missed the meeting that talked about this, so I apologize.
Not a problem. So in early summer of 2020, staff presented before the board for approval the services of, I believe it's JK Engineering or Architects, to conduct a facility master plan update. The district had many years ago established a facilities master plan that staff had found, outdated for obvious reasons. It was pretty old. And so we conducted an updated master plan about the time that plan was being completed for presentation was about the time former General Manager Michael Hawley retired. So that was put on pause, and we've been reviewing that as a staff to bring JK back on board with some pre-authorized funding that's still available on that, and then bring it to the board for final review and formal adoption. That plan includes several scenarios, 3 in particular that staff's interested in presenting to the board, which include expansion of the current facilities we're at now that would require some creative architecture and construction in the back 40 area that we so affectionately call our unused, unpaved area in the back. Another plan is to create some modest expansions here and some expansions out at the Corp Yard. And then a third scenario was to build an entire new facility at the Corp Yard and dispense or find alternative use for the current facilities. That was the most expensive of the options. And so what staff is looking to present once it's finalized here is a phased approach of adding additional indoor storage and staff facilities, things like overnight sleeping quarters for the line and water crew, some additional expansion of storage for the warehouse, and then clearly the biggest need is to provide indoor storage facilities for our expensive fleet infrastructure. And, you know, that's, a lot of that is exposed to the elements over the years. It creates some additional labor in clearing snow each morning. It, you know, reduces the life cycle of some of that expensive equipment. So staff is going to present a building construction model that would fit nicely into our larger facilities master plan, something similar to what the town has recently built at their courtyard, those long warehouse buildings with doors and upstairs utility. So we've been working with the town with their engineering team and looking forward to presenting that to the board here in the future weeks. So that $6 million placeholder is for that first phased approach over the next 2 years, pending approval and, you know, by the board.
And then COVID happened, and then I expect that the costs are going to double. Like, I mean, I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but it's a bummer.
We'll cross those bridges as we get to them. I did the planning commission meeting this week. They did have a suggestion. The town had commissioned a study about improvements on Gateway, and one of the suggestions was ask the PUD to move altogether, this building, just, and I was like, well, they haven't talked to us about that at all. As one of the commissioners said, do you have any input on this? I'm like, no.
We will accept creative funding for that
Right?
proposal.
I was like, are they going to pay for it? We've spent a lot of money upgrading this building already. It's like, so anyway,
And that's part
narrowly
of that
escaped.
facilities master plan. One of the considerations there is that during emergency deployments, this district is sort of cornered on this end of town. So this additional facility on that end provides some more, you know, readily mobilized crews during emergency events.
Redundancy in our ability to respond. Okay.
The way it looks like these prices went up on these bids, we're in for it. That's all I gotta say right now,
Well, they can't go up forever.
unless something levels out.
The ships outside of LA and Long Beach will eventually make it.
They
in.
will get here sooner or
So,
later. Yeah. Do we have any other board comments or questions
And
for
just a
this
question,
moment?
just one last question. And
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
you mentioned that this was supposed to be bond issuance for the $6 million. Are the reserves still based on that number also?
Well, we would get bond funds and use them to construct a building.
Correct.
So the net effect on reserves would be zero, I think, and other than we have to make a debt payment.
Okay.
Going
But
forward.
that's not, this isn't incorporated then into the rates?
To the extent there's debt service for the new building, yes. To the extent the 6 million is causing the 8.5, no, it's much less than that because it's just the debt service on the 6 million.
Okay.
Yeah. I see what you're saying, yep.
Okay,
Water?
next.
I could use some water. Let's see, water rates are approved by the board, as I understand it,
We did do
for,
that last year.
for 22 and 23, and those have been incorporated into the financial master plan as well as the budget for revenue expectations, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you.
And that's water's chart. They do not achieve,
Just not together.
as currently drafted, they did not achieve their goal until the last year.
All right.
No direct fiscal impact for tonight. The objective tonight was to receive the information from this workshop and provide strategic direction to staff regarding our budget preparations.
All right, well, thank you very much, Mike. I'm going to one more time ask my fellow directors if they have any more questions or comments or thoughts about the huge information dump that Mike just shared with us.
A lot of numbers, Mike. Thank you. Looks
you.
very thorough. So glad we're doing these and we're moving along.
All right.
I don't have any other comments. Thanks.
Okay? No? Dr. Harris, okay. Director Aguirre, do you have anything?
No, I'm fine.
He's fine? I'm fine too. It was a lot of
A lot of
information.
numbers that
Yeah.
somebody said.
You're doing all of the works. So, thank you, thank you. That was a great presentation. I think you covered all the territory, you answered all the questions, so we will digest and hopefully adopt our budget in a couple weeks.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback. Staff will take the feedback into account and revise the presentations for final discussion and adoption, and then also include the rate presentation.
Are those two separate actions, is the budget and then the rates they are?
The rate requires its
Okay.
own formal adoption.
Got it. Okay. We will be prepared to discuss and make a decision. Okay.
President Finn?
Yes, yes, yes,
Is
please.
public input necessary, or?
Workshop items, it's not necessary, but I'm very happy to take it if I saw a public, which I don't, but we might have a virtual, which I'm happy to entertain.
No virtual comment.
Okay, no comments on the budget thoughts that have been presented. It's more than thoughts, it's hard numbers, so thank you, Mike. All right, let's see, let's put our glasses down. I believe that we are winding up lots of things right now. So we have a closed session item still on our docket this evening. Do we want to just take a quick break and then can we take 5 minutes break, and then come back and then officially go into closed session?
Or
Or,
you could announce us going into closed session, and then we could take a break between that, during that transition.
perfect, I will announce that now, so no one has to wait for me to come back to announce it. We're going to hit item number 11, which is closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D1, existing litigation, Nevada County Superior Court Case Number TCU 21-7920.
And I'm assuming I need to recuse myself due to a conflict of interest.
Correct. Thank you. All right.